Los Angeles had a way of swallowing people whole. It wasn't just the crime or the corruption, it was the silence, the kind that stretched for blocks in neighborhoods where people knew better than to ask questions. The kind that lingered in alleyways after another life had been taken, another deal had gone south. In one of those forgotten corners of the city, a gang ruled like kings of the damned. They called themselves the Reapers, a motorcycle gang that had long since abandoned any pretense of brotherhood, replacing it with something far worse. They were dealers, extortionists, killers. Their clubhouse sat like a fortress in a rundown industrial district, its walls lined with stolen muscle cars and bikes gleaming under the glow of flickering neon lights. Anyone who crossed them was either buried or broken. At the head of this empire sat Roy Razor Deacon, a man with a reputation built on violence, a man who had never been told no without making someone pay for it. His name alone was enough to make most men step aside in fear. And then there was Isabel "Izzy" Carter, a woman who had spent the last 3 years of her life trying to survive a nightmare. She worked at a dive bar called Tina's, the kind of place where the drinks were cheap and the company was dangerous. The owner, a greasy lowlife named Victor Sloan, had promised her a fresh start when she arrived in LA. Instead, he made her property. Victor had a deal with the Reapers: girls, drugs, and silence in exchange for protection. And Izzy, like so many others before her, had been pulled into that hell. But unlike the others, she wasn't going to accept it. She had a plan. She was getting out. That night, she worked the floor as usual, serving watered-down whiskey to men who smelled of sweat, leather, and gasoline. The jukebox hummed in the background, an old rock song barely audible over the roaring laughter of bikers seated in the back. She could feel their eyes on her, weighing her, measuring her. But none of them mattered, because tonight she was leaving. She had a duffel bag hidden in the supply closet, clothes, cash she had scraped together over the past few months, and a stolen pistol she prayed she wouldn't have to use. If she could make it out the back door and into the alley, she had a bus ticket waiting for her at the station. She would be gone before anyone noticed, but fate had other plans. The doors slammed open with a bang, and in walked Razor Deacon himself. The room quieted immediately. Razor was a man built like a predator, lean, strong, and dangerous. He carried himself with the effortless arrogance of someone who knew he could kill anyone in the room and walk away without consequence. His beard was trimmed, his arms tattooed with grim reapers and blood-stained knives. He wore a black leather cut with "President" stitched into the front, and he was looking right at her. Izzy felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the tray she was holding, keeping her breathing steady. "I'll be damned," Razor murmured, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a snarl. "Sloan said you were pretty, but he didn't do you justice." Her stomach twisted. She forced herself to stay calm, nodding at him like she would any other customer. "Can I get you a drink?" she asked, her voice steady. Razor chuckled, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't come here for a drink." He glanced back at his men, who had already begun spreading through the bar like wolves in a chicken coop. "I came for you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Izzy's fingers curled tighter around the tray. She flicked her gaze toward Victor, who was leaning against the bar with a knowing smirk on his face. That son of a bitch. He had sold her out. "I don't know what you mean," she said, forcing herself to play dumb. If she could stall for just a few minutes, maybe she could find a way out. Razor's smirk didn't fade. He reached out and casually took the tray from her hands, setting it down on a nearby table. "You see, sweetheart, I got a problem." He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "I like owning nice things, and Victor tells me you're just sitting here, waiting to be claimed." Izzy went still. There was no escape now. She turned to look at Razor, meeting his gaze head-on. "I'm not property." The smirk disappeared. The bar was so quiet now that she could hear the hum of the broken neon sign outside. Razor tilted his head slightly, considering her words. Then, without warning, he backhanded her across the face. The force of it sent her stumbling against a table, knocking over glasses as she hit the ground hard. Pain exploded in her jaw, her vision blurring. A few of the patrons flinched, but no one stepped in. They all knew better. Izzy gasped, her fingers curling against the floor as she fought the instinct to reach for her gun. That was the wrong answer. Was the wrong, darling, Razor murmured, crouching down beside her. But don't worry, you'll learn to behave. She glared up at him, her lip bleeding, but she refused to look away. I'd rather die. Razor chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face like she was a misbehaving pet. Oh, sweetheart, I like your fire. Then his expression hardened. But make no mistake, you don't have a choice. He stood, snapping his fingers toward his men. Bag her. Before she could move, two bikers grabbed her, yanking her up by her arms. She fought, kicked, screamed, but it was useless. The bar patrons turned away. Victor watched, smirking. She was dragged toward the door, and as they pulled her outside, she realized this wasn't just some punishment. This was an abduction. They weren't just teaching her a lesson. They were taking her away, and no one was coming to help. Or so she thought. Because what the Reapers didn't know, what Victor hadn't realized when he sold her out, was that Isabel Carter wasn't just another girl. She had a father who had once been one of the most feared men in the U.S. military, a man who had spent decades waging wars in places no one talked about, a man who had promised his daughter that if she ever needed him, all she had to do was call. And soon, very soon, General Walter Carter was coming, and he was bringing hell with him. The Reapers stormed into Tina's that night like they owned the place, and in a way, they did. The club was a hunting ground for men like them, men who took what they wanted and crushed anyone who dared to resist. The air reeked of sweat, booze, and cheap cologne, the kind that burned Izzy's nostrils as she weaved between tables, trying to keep her head down, but no amount of looking away would save her tonight. Roy Razor Deacon stood at the center of it all, his presence infecting the room like a sickness. His leather cut bore the Reaper's insignia, the skeletal hand gripping a scythe stitched into the back. He was grinning, always grinning, the way a predator does before it sinks its teeth into something soft. Izzy felt the weight of his eyes on her before she even turned around. The music thumped loud, but the moment Razor spoke, it was like the sound cut out just for him. "Look what we got here." His voice was thick with amusement. "The little stray Victor's been keeping on a leash." Izzy's gut tightened. She didn't stop moving, didn't acknowledge him. Keep serving drinks, keep moving, keep breathing. That was the plan. But the plan fell apart when Razor grabbed her wrist. "Not gonna say hello, sweetheart." He pulled her close, so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "That ain't polite." Izzy yanked back, but his grip was iron. "Let go of me." A slow chuckle rippled through the gang members around him, each one shifting in their seats, watching like spectators at a pit fight. Razor's smirk widened. "Oh, she's got some fire. I like that." Victor, the bastard who called himself her boss, came slinking out of the back. "Come on, Razor," he laughed nervously, wiping his sweaty forehead with a napkin. "Don't go roughing up my best girl. She's good for business." Razor didn't even glance at him. "She's mine now." The words made Izzy's skin crawl. He wasn't asking, he wasn't offering, he was taking. Victor had the nerve to look surprised. "Now, hold on. I ain't asking," Razor interrupted, his fingers tightening on Izzy's wrist. She bit her lip, swallowing a wince. Victor hesitated, then laughed, but it was forced, like he knew his place. Hey, no problem, just saying she's been good to me." Razor's smile turned sharp. "Then I'm sure she'll be even better for me." The club had gone deathly quiet now. A few girls in the back huddled near the bar, their wide eyes locked on Izzy, their silence screaming the same thing: "Don't fight. Don't make it worse." But Izzy had spent years watching men like this devour people. She knew exactly what happened to girls who didn't make it worse. She wouldn't go without a fight. She drove her knee up, fast and hard, aiming for the one spot no man could ignore. She barely made it an inch before Razor caught her. His hand shot forward, locking around her throat, and slammed her against the bar. The impact stole the air from her lungs. Glass rattled. The bartender flinched, but didn't move to help. Razor leaned in close, his fingers pressing into her windpipe just enough to make it hard to breathe. "Now, that," he murmured, his voice so calm it made her blood run cold, "was a mistake." Izzy clawed at his wrist, her nails digging deep, but it was useless. His strength dwarfed hers. He could break her with half the effort it took to snap a matchstick. She was losing, and the worst part, the club kept going like nothing was happening. Because this was nothing to them. Victor wasn't stepping in, the bouncers weren't stepping in, nobody was. And just as her vision blurred, just as her legs began to give out, Razor released her. She crumpled to her knees, gasping, clutching at her throat. "I like 'em feisty," Razor mused, cracking his knuckles. "But you're not feisty. You're just dumb." He jerked his head toward the door. "Bag her." Izzy barely had time to react before hands grabbed her from all sides. She kicked, she screamed, but it didn't matter. The moment the black bag went over her head, the world turned suffocating and dark. And as they hauled her outside, she realized no one was coming to help her. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Because across town, in a house far from the filth of the Reaper's empire, a phone was ringing. And on the other end of that line, a man who had spent his entire life fighting wars no one talked about was about to get a message that would change everything. The night was deep, the streets of Los Angeles humming with distant sirens and the occasional roar of an engine tearing through the quiet. Inside a modest house on the outskirts of the city, General Walter Carter sat at his kitchen table, nursing a glass of whiskey. He had no real interest in drinking. The years had not been kind to his bones, nor to his mind, but he was a man who didn't dwell on what couldn't be changed. The military had shaped him, hardened him. He had spent 3 decades leading men into war zones, making impossible decisions and surviving battles where good men died like insects under a boot. And yet, with all the things he had survived, with all the blood and sweat and fire that had carved him into something damn near unbreakable, the one thing he hadn't been able to fix was his own family. His only living relative, Isabel Carter, had been lost to him for years, not dead, worse. She had vanished into the underbelly of the city, swallowed whole by the kind of filth he had spent his life trying to erase. He had tried to find her, hired men, called in favors, but she had slipped through his fingers every time. The guilt sat in his gut like a dull blade, pressing against something that never quite healed. He took a slow sip of his drink, sighing. And then the phone rang. Carter frowned, setting down the glass. No one called him this late, not unless it was serious. He reached for the phone, his calloused fingers wrapping around the receiver. "Carter." "General," a female voice whispered on the other end. The tone was urgent, scared. "It's me. It's Lena." Carter stiffened. He knew that name. Lena Alvarez. She had been Izzy's best friend back when she was still in school. That meant one thing. This was about Izzy. Carter sat up straighter, his military instincts firing to life like an engine roaring back from idle. "Talk." "Izzy's in trouble," Lena breathed. "Bad trouble." Carter's grip on the phone tightened. His heart, usually steady as a war drum, picked up its pace. "Where?" I don't know exactly, but the Reapers took her." "You know who they are?" Carter's jaw locked. Oh, he knew. The Reapers were scum. A motorcycle gang that had evolved from street punks into something worse. Drug runners, arms dealers, human traffickers. They didn't just break the law, they operated outside of it, untouched by local authorities because they had deep pockets and dirt on the right people. And now they had his granddaughter. Carter exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Tell me everything." Lena's words spilled out in a frantic rush. "She was working at this club, Tina's. I don't know how she got mixed up in that world, but Victor, the owner, was keeping her there. The Reapers came in tonight and Razor Deacon took her. He said she was his now, General, and no one stopped him." Carter closed his eyes for a brief moment. Razor Deacon. He had heard the name before. A sadistic bastard with a reputation for being as unpredictable as he was brutal. He led the Reapers with an iron fist, and worse, he enjoyed making people suffer. Carter opened his eyes. his voice low and deadly. "How long ago?" "Maybe an hour," Lena said. "I tried to follow them, but they've got people everywhere. I didn't know who else to call." "You did good," Carter said. "Now listen to me, Lena. I need you to stay put. No more chasing them, do you understand?" "But, do you understand?" His voice cut through the hesitation. Years of command training left no room for argument. Lena swallowed hard. "Yeah, I got it." Carter exhaled slowly. He had spent years wishing for this moment, the chance to find his granddaughter, to pull her back from whatever hell she had fallen into. But now that it was here, now that he knew she had been taken, something dark and ancient uncoiled inside of him. The old soldier was awake, and he was going to burn the Reapers to the ground. A call to war. Carter hung up the phone, pushing himself to his feet. His old bones creaked in protest, but his mind was already sharper than it had been in years. He moved through the house with purpose, his steps even, methodical. He passed the old photographs on the walls, pictures of his military days, men he had fought beside, some of them dead long before their time. He had buried good men. He had avenged even better ones. And now it was time to remind the world who the hell Walter Carter was. His first move was the weapons locker. He unlocked it with a series of precise motions, his hands working from muscle memory alone. Inside was a collection of firearms, knives, and gear that most people would only see in classified military briefings. Carter pulled out a Glock 19, racked the slide, and holstered it at his hip. One gun wouldn't be enough. He grabbed his Remington shotgun, a compact beast he had modified himself. He strapped a combat knife to his belt. Then he reached for his phone book. There were names in that book, names of men who owed him favors. Some were retired special forces, others mercenaries who still had blood in the game. They had all been through hell with him at one point or another, and tonight he was calling them in. The Reapers' hideout. Meanwhile, across the city, the Reapers were celebrating their newest acquisition. Izzy was locked in a room, her hands bound behind her back, a cut on her lip from where Razor had struck her when she fought too hard. She wasn't the first girl they had taken, but she was about to be the first one to fight back in a way they never saw coming. Because outside, in the dark streets of Los Angeles, her grandfather was coming, and hell was coming with him. The night stretched long and merciless over Los Angeles. The city's neon glow flickered like a pulse, indifferent to the wars that raged in its shadows. One of those wars had just begun, and Walter Carter was its harbinger. A call to arms. Carter moved like a machine, dialing numbers he hadn't used in years. Some of the men on the other end of the line had families now. Some had left the battlefield behind, but there were a special kind of few, who never truly left the fight. They answered. "Carter!" A gruff voice rasped on the other end of the line. "Shit, man. Thought you were dead." "Not yet, Mendez," Carter replied, pulling open a duffel bag and stuffing it with extra ammunition. "But some people are about to be." There was a pause, then a slow, knowing chuckle. "Who?" "The Reapers." The silence on the line stretched before Mendez exhaled. "Jesus, you don't do small problems, do you?" "Izzy," Carter said. Just that one word. Her name. Mendez's tone changed instantly. He had been there when she was born, had held her in his arms when she was a baby, back when Carter still had something resembling a family. "I'll be there," Mendez said without hesitation. The next call was to Silva, a former Marine sniper with steady hands and an unshakable patience for killing the right people. "Tell me where," was all Silva said. Then came Bishop, a demolitions expert who used to rig explosives for the kind of missions the government would never admit to funding. "I got enough C4 to level a block," Bishop muttered. "You want a surgical strike or fireworks?" "Both," Carter said. And finally Rains, his oldest living friend, a man who had once led Black Ops units into places that didn't officially exist. "Walter," Rains greeted. His voice was aged but sharp, a wolf that had lived too long to be careless. "When was the last time you asked me for help?" Carter didn't hesitate. 30 years ago. "And what happened then?" "We left a trail of bodies." A pause. Then, "Same plan?" Damn right. The line went dead. Carter didn't need to hear a confirmation. Rains would come. And now Carter had his war dogs. The Reapers had taken the wrong girl. The Reapers' compound. The warehouse sat just outside city limits, an old industrial facility repurposed into a fortress of vice and violence. The Reapers had made it their headquarters, their sanctuary from the law. Tonight, it was a prison. Izzy sat on a concrete floor, her wrists bound with zip ties behind her back. The room was small, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls stank of oil, beer, and old sweat. Her lip was split from the last time Razor had hit her. But he hadn't broken her. The lock on the door clicked, and then he was there, stepping inside like a king inspecting his new property. Razor crouched in front of her, his hands resting lazily on his knees. "You know," he said, tilting his head, "most girls stop fighting by now." Izzy lifted her chin, spitting blood at his boots. Razor's smirk flickered. Then, quick as lightning, his hand lashed out, gripping her throat and slamming her head against the wall. She saw stars. "You got one chance," he murmured. "Learn your place. You belong to me now." Izzy struggled to breathe. His grip was tight, pressing on her windpipe. She could feel the bruises forming, the raw ache of helplessness sinking in like rot. But then something changed. Razor let go. He stood up suddenly, pulling his phone from his pocket. He was frowning. Izzy blinked through the haze of pain, trying to understand what had made him so tense. A moment later, Razor turned to one of his men, his voice sharp. "Where the hell is Crowley?" "He's outside." "No, dumbass. Call him." The man fumbled for his phone, pressed the call button, and waited. No answer. Razor's fingers twitched. Then the second phone rang. Another member answered it, his face drained of color. "Boss," the man said, swallowing hard. "They found Crowley's bike." Razor's jaw tightened. "And?" The man hesitated. Then, "No Crowley, just the bike, still running." Razor's eyes darkened. He turned back to Izzy, studying her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, more to himself than to her. Izzy felt her pulse race. She didn't know what had happened outside, but she knew who was responsible, and if the Reapers were afraid, that meant her grandfather had arrived. The storm breaks. Carter and his men moved like ghosts through the compound's perimeter. Mendez was the first to strike. The sentry outside never saw the garrote wire before it was buried deep into his throat, his last breath gurgling out as his lifeless body was lowered to the ground. Silver was already setting up, his sniper scope sweeping the area. Two on the balcony, one with a shotgun. "I got 'em." A single foot, two suppressed shots. The men crumpled. Carter moved forward, his shotgun at the ready. Bishop placed explosives on the northern gate, giving them an exit plan if things got messy. Then Rain's voice crackled through Carter's earpiece. "We're in position." Carter nodded once. His heart was steady. His hands, once gnarled by age, were now as firm as they had ever been. He had spent his life leading men into battle, and now he was doing it one last time. "For Izzy," Carter whispered. Then he kicked in the door. The chaos erupted instantly. Silver's rifle dropped two men on the catwalk before they could react. Mendez tore through the nearest Reaper, slamming his knife into the man's ribs and twisting hard. Bishop set off the first charge, blowing a hole into the warehouse wall, sending debris raining down on panicked bikers. And Carter, he walked through the flames with his shotgun raised, each blast erasing a life that didn't deserve to keep breathing. Inside her cell, Izzy heard the gunfire. She smiled. The first gunshot shattered the silence inside the compound, sending panic rippling through the Reapers like a wildfire. Razor Deacon's head snapped up at the sound, his instincts screaming at him before his mind could catch up. He knew that sound. Not just gunfire, precision gunfire. This wasn't some rival gang trying to make a statement. This was calculated. Another shot, then another. The distant thwip of a silencer. One of his men, stationed up in the guard post, crumpled like a rag doll, his body slipping over the railing and landing in a heap below. "Shit," one of the bikers muttered, stepping back toward the door. Razor turned to Izzy. his expression shifting from amusement to something darker, suspicion, fury. "I'll ask one last time," he said, his voice eerily calm despite the chaos unfolding outside. "Who the hell are you?" Izzy didn't answer. Because she knew. She knew exactly who had come for her. Razor's jaw tightened as more gunfire erupted. Too precise, too fast. This wasn't a random firefight. This was an operation. Then the first explosion hit. The northern wall erupted in flames and debris, the shockwave sending dust and smoke through the compound. The force knocked Razor and his men off balance, shaking the very ground beneath them. For a split second, everything was chaos. Shouts, the scramble of boots on concrete, weapons being drawn. Razor spun toward the door. "Lock it down! I want eyes everywhere! Someone get me a—" Boom! The second explosion hit, this time tearing through one of their garages. Fire licked at the metal beams, black smoke curling up into the night sky like a beacon. It was deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't just coming in blind. They were herding them. Razor realized it a second too late. Then the first man in black stepped through the shattered doorway. Walter Carter moved with the kind of precision and control that only a lifetime of war could forge. His shotgun was raised, his boots crunching over debris as he advanced. To the men inside, he must have looked like death itself. He fired once. The blast took down the nearest Reaper, hurling him backward into a stack of crates. Another shot. Another man down. Behind Carter, Mendez swept in, clearing the left side of the room with his pistol raised and steady. Two more figures moved in the shadows. Silva had taken a position somewhere above, his rifle trained through the windows, while Rains covered the rear, watching for runners. There would be no escape tonight. A panicked Reaper rushed Carter from the side, a rusted crowbar raised high. Carter didn't hesitate. He pivoted, slamming the stock of his shotgun into the man's ribs with enough force to crack bone. The biker crumpled, gasping, before Carter finished him with a sharp boot to the face. A few feet away, another Reaper pulled his weapon, but before he could aim, a single precise gunshot tore through his skull. Silva, watching from his perch, exhaled slowly. Too easy. Razor stood frozen, watching his men fall like dominoes. He had been in plenty of fights before. He had won plenty of fights before. But this was something else entirely. He barely had time to process it before Carter's cold, unforgiving stare locked onto him, and in that moment, Razor understood. This wasn't just some rival gang war. This was personal. Then Izzy spoke, her voice hoarse but sharp with triumph. "You're dead." Razor turned back to her, the rage returning fast, the need to reclaim control burning inside him. He reached for her, fist tightening, ready to break something. But this time she wasn't helpless. She moved first. The chair she had been sitting on wasn't bolted down. She surged forward, bringing the full weight of it into his knee. The force wasn't enough to cripple him, but it was enough to stagger him, enough to give her the opening she needed. Izzy twisted, bringing her bound hands forward. There was a piece of shattered glass near the floor. She grabbed it. Razor recovered fast. He lunged for her, hand going for her throat again. But Izzy was done being grabbed. She swung the glass upward, sharp, jagged, slicing across his face. Razor roared in pain, his hand snapping back as blood spattered onto the floor. He reeled, clutching his cheek where a fresh, deep gash had torn through his flesh. It was the first time anyone had ever made him bleed. Izzy didn't waste the moment. She ran. Outside, Carter was still moving through the compound, sweeping past the bodies, his sole focus on finding Izzy. Then he heard it, footsteps running, then a voice, her voice. "Grandpa!" Carter turned just in time to see Izzy burst through the hallway, her hands still bound, her face bruised but defiant. And behind her, Razor, bleeding, furious, armed. The biker raised his pistol. Carter fired first. The shotgun blast hit just inches away, the force sending Razor sprawling back through the doorframe. He hit the ground hard, the weapon knocked from his grip, but Carter wasn't done. He advanced, his boots slow, deliberate, as he chambered another round. Razor groaned, rolling over, reaching for his fallen gun. Carter kicked it away. Then he aimed the barrel of his shotgun directly at Razor's head. The Reaper's leader blinked up at him, glaring through the blood smeared across his face. He coughed, then spat red onto the floor. "You're dead, old man," he rasped. "You got no idea what's coming." Carter tilted his head. "I do." Then he pressed the shotgun barrel to Razor's knee and fired. The scream that followed was inhuman. Razor convulsed, his body arching as pain ripped through him, blood spraying onto the concrete. Izzy flinched, but she didn't look away. Carter lowered the shotgun, then squatted down beside Razor's writhing form. He grabbed a fistful of the man's blood-soaked hair, jerking his head up so their eyes met. "You took the wrong girl," Carter murmured. His voice was low, steady, deadly. "And now I'm taking everything from you." Razor panted, his skin pale from the shock. But despite the pain, despite the agony, he laughed. "You think you can take them all?" he gasped. "You think this is over?" Carter's grip tightened. "It's just getting started." Then, without another word, he slammed Razor's face into the ground. The biker leader didn't get back up. Carter exhaled slowly, then turned to Izzy. She stood there, staring at him. Staring at the man she barely recognized, the man she now knew had never truly left the battlefield. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carter reached into his pocket, pulled out a knife, and cut the zip ties from her wrists. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. Izzy rubbed her bruised skin, then looked up at him. "No," she admitted, "but I will be." Carter nodded once. Then he stood, reloading his shotgun, because there was still work to do. And the Reapers? They weren't finished yet. The compound reeked of blood, gunpowder, and smoke. Carter stood amidst the wreckage, his shotgun still warm in his hands, the spent shell casings scattered like fallen leaves at his feet. The air was thick with the aftermath of violence. And yet, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Reapers had built their empire on fear, on the unshakable belief that no one could touch them. That belief had been shattered tonight. But Carter knew men like Razor. They didn't accept defeat. They came back harder, meaner, more desperate. Izzy stood beside him, breathing hard, the adrenaline still pulsing through her. Her wrists were raw from the zip ties, her lips swollen, but she was standing, and that was enough for now. She looked at Razor's crumpled form, blood pooling from his destroyed knee, his chest barely rising and falling with shallow breaths. Carter had taken him out of the fight, but he hadn't killed him, not yet. There was still something useful in keeping him breathing. Mendez and Bishop were already securing the remaining Reapers in the compound, zip-tying the ones who weren't dead, dragging the wounded into a corner. Silver kept watch from his sniper's perch, his scope sweeping the perimeter in case any stragglers tried to make a move. Rains walked in through the smoke, his pistol still in hand, the casual confidence of a man who had seen this all before. Carter reloaded his shotgun, the sound crisp in the still air. "How many got away? 4, maybe 5, Silver's voice crackled through the radio. "They took off as soon as the fireworks started, but they won't get far. They'll run to their people," Rains said, looking down at Razor. "And when they do, they're gonna tell them what happened here, that an old man walked in and tore their house apart." He gave a dark chuckle. "I'd pay to see their faces." Izzy shivered, but not from fear. She was watching Carter, really watching him, and what she saw unsettled her. He wasn't just her grandfather. He was something else now, something she had never truly understood before. This wasn't just a man. This was a soldier, a warrior. And he wasn't done. Carter stepped toward Razor's barely conscious form and crouched beside him. He grabbed the man's blood-soaked hair, tilting his head up so their eyes met. Razor's face was twisted in pain, his breathing uneven, but the defiance hadn't left his eyes. He grinned, even now. "You're dead, old man," Razor rasped. "You think this is over?" Carter said nothing at first, just studied him. Then, without warning, he drove his fist into Razor's already broken knee. The scream that followed was animalistic, raw, tearing through the night air like a dying wolf's last howl. Izzy flinched, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. Carter let Razor fall back onto the ground, his face pale from the pain. "It's over for you," he said evenly. "For the rest of them, not yet." He stood up, looking at Rains. "We need to move. They'll be coming." "Yeah," Rains nodded, tucking his gun away. "But we're not going to wait for 'em, are we?" Carter shook his head. "We take the fight to them." Mendez pulled a burner phone from his pocket, tossing it to Carter. "You got a message you want to send?" Carter looked at Razor, then down at his own bloodied hands. He nodded once. "Yeah, I got a message." Mendez knelt beside Razor, grabbing him by the collar. "Hey, tough guy, you're going to make a call." Razor laughed weakly, spitting blood onto the ground. "Go to hell." Carter crouched again, his voice low. "You're already there, son. But if you want to live long enough to walk out of here, you're going to do exactly what I tell you." There was something in his tone, something cold, final. Razor swallowed hard, the fight dimming in his eyes just a little. He knew that Carter wasn't bluffing. Mendez put the phone in Razor's trembling hand. "Call your second in command," Carter ordered. Razor hesitated. Carter nudged the shotgun barrel against his already mangled knee. With a shaking hand, Razor dialed. The call rang once, twice. Then a gruff voice answered. "Razor?" Carter leaned in, speaking before Razor could. "He's not in charge anymore." A beat of silence. "Then who the hell is this?" "The man who just took apart your crew," Carter said, "and the man who's coming for the rest of you." "Go to hell, old man." Carter smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Already been." He let the silence stretch just long enough. Then, "You got two choices. You pack up, you leave town and never look back, or you stay, and I put every last one of you in the ground." The man on the other end was silent for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "What about Razor?" Carter looked down at the broken, bleeding man at his feet. "He's not your problem anymore." He ended the call. "The Reapers would run. Some of them at least, the smarter ones. But there would be those who wouldn't, those too proud, too angry, too dumb to back down. And they would come. Good." Carter turned to Izzy. "We're leaving," he said. She blinked, her breath unsteady. "Where?" He looked out over the smoldering remains of the Reaper's compound, at the bodies left in his wake, at the war he had just begun. To finish this, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Carter was done waiting. The Reapers had taken something from him. Now he was going to take everything from them. Carter had spent decades walking through the ruins of war. He had seen men die in dirt trenches, their last breath choking out in the mud. He had buried friends, taken lives, and fought battles that never made the history books. But tonight, standing in the wreckage of the Reaper's compound, this war felt different. Because this time, it was his family on the line. They moved quickly. The bodies of the Reapers were still warm, the fires still smoldering, but Carter wasn't sticking around for the next wave. He knew how gangs worked. There were always more, always a second in command waiting to take the throne, always a soldier eager to prove himself. The Reapers would regroup, and when they did, they'd come looking for blood. Good, let them try. Mendez and Bishop secured what they could from the compound, gathering weapons, ammo, and anything that could be of use. Silver stayed perched above, his sniper rifle scanning the darkness, his voice calm through the radio. "We got movement on the outer perimeter. Stragglers. 3 of them." Carter didn't hesitate. "Drop 'em!" 3 muffled shots. 3 bodies hit the dirt. No hesitation, no mercy. Carter turned to Izzy, who stood a few feet away, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She was trying to hold herself together, but Carter saw the way her fingers twitched, the way her jaw clenched and unclenched. She had been through hell, and it wasn't over. "Come on," he said. "We're leaving." Izzy hesitated. "Where?" Carter didn't look back at the compound. "Somewhere safer." There was no such thing as safe. Not anymore. The convoy moved out fast. They took Razor's own vehicles, a fleet of stolen trucks and bikes that reeked of old cigarettes and bad decisions. Izzy sat up front with Carter, her knuckles white against her lap. She didn't speak, not at first. Then finally, her voice broke the silence. "How did you find me?" Carter kept his eyes on the road, his grip firm on the wheel. Didn't have to. The moment they took you, they signed their own death warrant. She swallowed. You didn't even know if I was alive. I knew, Carter said, because anything else wasn't an option. The headlights cut through the dark, the city stretching out ahead of them. They were heading to a safe house. One of Carter's old contacts had a place just outside the city, a remote cabin hidden in the hills. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would give them time to plan. Because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The cabin was quiet, isolated. It sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by trees so dense that no one could get within 100 yards without being seen. It was a soldier's retreat, a place built for men who didn't want to be found. Mendez pulled the truck up to the side of the house, cutting the engine. Bishop and Silva followed on their bikes, their presence silent but heavy with purpose. Rains was already inside, checking the perimeter, making sure they hadn't been followed. Izzy hesitated at the front steps. She had spent years running from men like Victor, running from the city, running from herself. And now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could stop. Carter stepped beside her. "You're safe here." She let out a bitter laugh. "Safe?" She shook her head. "You just started a war." Carter turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I ended one battle, that's not the same thing." Izzy's breath hitched. "They're going to come after us." Carter's gaze was steady. "Let them." Inside, the team gathered around the worn wooden table in the center of the cabin. Maps were laid out, weapons checked. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that only men who had seen too much violence could understand. Rains leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So what's the plan?" Carter exhaled. "We take them apart. All of them." Mendez cracked his knuckles. "Sounds messy." "It will be." Silva spoke next. "We could lay low. Let them implode on their own." Carter shook his head. "No chance. If we run, they'll keep coming. They'll find her again." His eyes flicked to Izzy. "I won't let that happen." Izzy shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Bishop leaned forward, tapping a knife against the table. "So, we go hunting?" Carter nodded. "Yeah, but not blind. We hit them where it hurts." Mendez smirked. "Drugs? Guns? Money?" Carter's expression was stone. "People." That changed the mood in the room, because they all knew what he meant. The Reapers didn't just move drugs or guns. They trafficked people, women, kids. They made their fortune in the darkest corners of humanity, and Carter was about to burn those corners to the ground. Rains exhaled. "You're talking about going straight for their supply chain." "Exactly." Bishop rubbed his jaw. "You do that, we're not just putting the Reapers out of business. We're starting a war with everyone they work with." Carter met his gaze. "You scared?" Bishop grinned. "Hell no!" Izzy finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. "And then what?" Carter turned to her. She held his stare. "After you tear them apart, after you kill every last one of them, what happens then?" Carter didn't blink. "You walk away." She let out a breath. "And you?" "I don't." The words settled between them. A truth they both knew but didn't want to say out loud. This wasn't just about saving her. This was about finishing something that should have been finished a long time ago. Carter pushed away from the table. "We move in 2 hours. Get some rest if you can." No one moved. No one spoke, because no one was going to sleep tonight. The Reapers' new stronghold was in an abandoned freight yard on the east side of the city. Dozens of old containers stacked like a maze, with hidden compartments, tunnels, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. It would have been impenetrable to anyone else. But Carter and his team weren't just anyone. Silva set up 3 miles out, his sniper rifle trained on the entrance. "Got a head count. Looks like 20, maybe more." Mendez smirked. 20 against 5? Almost feel bad for them. "Don't!" Bishop crouched beside Carter. planting charges along the perimeter. You want a distraction or the whole thing leveled? Carter thought for a moment. Both. The radio crackled. Rains. We got movement inside. They're loading something. Looks like a transport van. Carter's jaw clenched. They're moving people. Izzy, listening nearby, he felt her stomach twist. She had seen what happened to the girls who got loaded into those vans. Mendez glanced at Carter. We go now? Carter exhaled. No. Mendez frowned. No. Carter pulled his pistol, checked the chamber, and locked eyes with his men. We go loud. Then he gave the signal, and all hell broke loose. The first explosion lit up the night like a second sun. The freight yard trembled as a section of its perimeter erupted in fire and shrapnel, sending metal shards spinning into the air. Smoke curled upward, thick and dark, obscuring the stars. Inside, the Reapers scrambled, shouting orders, grabbing weapons, trying to process what the hell just happened. Carter moved first. He pushed forward through the smoke, shotgun raised, his steps steady. He wasn't running. Running was for men who still had fear in them. He fired once. A Reaper at the gate crumpled before he could even aim his rifle. Carter stepped over the body, never slowing. Mendez was already inside, his knife flashing in the darkness. A guard caught sight of him too late. A sharp blade slid between his ribs, twisting, silencing his scream before it could leave his throat. Mendez let the body drop and disappeared back into the shadows. From his sniper perch, Silva whispered through the radio, his voice calm. 4 down, 17 left. Bishop was the next to strike. The second charge went off. Another explosion, this time deeper in the yard. The force of it rocked the stacked shipping containers, toppling 2 of them onto the main exit route. No way out now. Carter smirked. Good. The Reapers were scrambling, shouting into radios, trying to organize, but this wasn't a fair fight. They were brawlers, street thugs, criminals. Carter and his team? They were soldiers. Another Reaper turned a corner, raising a shotgun. Silva's bullet hit him between the eyes. 16, the sniper muttered. The gunfire intensified as the Reapers finally managed to get their bearings. They started firing blindly, spraying bullets into the smoke, trying to pin down an enemy they couldn't see. Carter ducked behind a crate as rounds slammed into the metal, sparks flying. Bishop, he growled into the radio. Bishop's voice was casual. On it. The third explosion ripped through the main garage, sending a fireball into the sky. A gas line ignited and the resulting shockwave knocked several Reapers off their feet. From behind a row of containers, Izzy flinched at the sheer force of it. She had seen violence before. She had lived it. But this was war. And her grandfather, he was built for this. Carter moved again. He came up behind 2 Reapers trying to reload their rifles and didn't give them the chance. 2 shots, 2 bodies, 14. Rains had breached the south side, moving with the kind of precision only a man with a lifetime of Black Ops training could manage. He rolled a grenade toward a group of Reapers, using an overturned truck for cover. The explosion was deafening. 3 men died instantly. 11, Silva reported. One of the Reapers, a younger guy, and barely out of his 20s, sprinted for a motorcycle parked near the far gate. Carter saw him. The kid was trying to run, trying to escape, maybe even trying to get reinforcements. Carter lifted his shotgun. Then he hesitated, just for a second. The kid was young, too young to die like this. But then the kid raised a pistol. Carter didn't hesitate again. One pull of the trigger. The kid dropped to the ground, motionless. Carter exhaled. The weight of another dead body added to the pile, already sitting heavy on his soul. "I got movement," Mendez called over the radio. Carter turned, following Mendez's line of sight toward the loading bay. A van was pulling out, its tires screeching against the concrete. Izzy saw it too. Her blood ran cold. She knew what was in that van. Girls! Carter didn't even hesitate. He sprinted forward, gun raised. "Silva! Tires!" Silva's rifle cracked. One shot. The van's front left tire exploded, sending the vehicle skidding sideways. It slammed into a stack of crates, coming to a violent stop. Carter reached it first. He ripped open the driver's door, yanking the Reaper out. The man threw a desperate punch, but Carter dodged it easily. He grabbed the man's arm and snapped it like a twig. The Reaper screamed, collapsing onto the pavement. Carter didn't spare him another glance. He moved to the back of the van and yanked the doors open. The sight made his stomach twist. 6 girls, some as young as 16, terrified, eyes wide, huddled together. Izzy reached him just as he was pulling out his knife to cut their restraints. She pushed past him. "It's okay," she said quickly, kneeling beside them. "You're safe. You're safe now." One of the girls, blonde, barely 17, burst into tears. Carter scanned the yard. 7 Reapers left. This was almost over. Almost. Then the radio crackled. "Carter!" Silver's voice was tense. "We got a problem." Carter turned. "What?" Silver exhaled. "Backup just arrived." A low rumbling filled the air. Then headlights appeared through the smoke. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. Reapers. The rest of them. Carter's grip on his shotgun tightened. Mendez muttered, "Shit." Raines smirked. "Looks like we get round 2. Bishop was already reaching for the detonator in his pocket. "I still got 1 charge left. Say the word." Carter stared at the approaching army of bikers. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was about sending a message. Izzy looked at him. "We can't run, can we?" Carter's jaw tightened. No, because running meant leaving those girls behind. Running meant the Reapers would rebuild. And Carter had one goal tonight: to make sure none of them walked away from this. He lifted his shotgun, looked at his men, and said the only thing that mattered. "Let's finish this." The sound of engines filled the air, low and rumbling like distant thunder rolling across the city. Carter stood still, shotgun raised, watching as the second wave of Reapers descended upon them. They came fast, at least 24 strong, their headlights cutting through the thick smoke still hanging in the freight yard. Mendez cursed under his breath, already reaching for an extra magazine. "That's a whole lot of stupid coming our way." Raines checked his sidearm, rolling his shoulders like a man getting ready for a long night. "We could leave now. Get the girls out, regroup." Carter didn't look at him. "No." Izzy turned to him, her hands still gripping the wrists of one of the freed girls, her pulse pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Grandpa, we can't." "Yes, we can," Carter said, his voice calm. "We end it here," because he knew men like the Reapers. If they ran now, this wouldn't be over. These bikers weren't going to stop. They weren't going to forget. And every second they left them standing was a second someone else suffered. No more. He turned to Bishop, who still held the detonator in his palm. "How much boom do we have left?" Bishop smirked. "1 last charge, buried in that fuel drum over by the shipping crates." He flicked the safety cap off the trigger. "Should light up real nice." Carter nodded. "Not yet." Silver's voice crackled through the radio. "They're splitting up, half circling around, the rest coming straight for you." Carter exhaled slowly. "Take as many as you can." "Copy that." A single shot rang out. The lead rider jerked violently, his bike veering left before flipping over. His body crashed against the pavement, tumbling in a mess of leather and broken bones. Silver's voice was calm. "1 down." The Reapers opened fire. Bullets zipped through the air, slamming into metal containers, kicking up sparks against the pavement. Carter ducked behind a stack of crates, pumping a fresh shell into the shotgun, waiting for his moment. Then the first wave hit. A Reaper rounded the corner, rifle raised. Carter didn't hesitate. He fired once, the blast tearing through the man's chest, knocking him backward into the dirt. Mendez was already moving, weaving between cover as he unloaded his pistol, dropping 2 bikers before they could react. Raines took a knee, methodically firing at the men still rushing toward them. Every shot found its mark, and then suddenly they were too close for guns. The first Reaper reached Carter, swinging a crowbar at his head. Carter ducked, letting the metal whistle past before driving the butt of his shotgun into the biker's stomach. The man doubled over, gasping. Carter finished him with a brutal strike to the back of the skull. Another came at him, knife flashing. Carter grabbed the man's wrist, twisting hard until the blade clattered to the ground. A quick elbow to the throat sent the biker choking to his knees. Mendez wasn't even using his gun anymore. A knife in each hand, he moved like a predator, slicing, dodging, cutting down anyone who got close. Rains fought like a boxer, heavy and brutal. He caught a biker across the jaw with a hook that sent teeth flying, then grabbed another by the collar and drove him headfirst into a steel beam. Silver was still above, picking off anyone dumb enough to step into the open. Izzy and the girls huddled behind cover, watching it all unfold. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter, but there were too many. Carter felt the shift in momentum. For every one of them they put down, another took his place. The Reapers were pushing in, pressing harder, swarming like animals. He had to end this. "Now, Bishop," he growled into the radio. "Light 'em up." Bishop didn't hesitate. He hit the trigger. The explosion ripped through the freight yard, a wall of fire erupting into the sky as the fuel drum ignited. The shockwave sent Reapers flying, their bodies tumbling across the asphalt like ragdolls. The remaining bikers staggered, some thrown from their bikes, others diving for cover as the heat licked at their backs. Mendez grinned. "I love that sound." The fire spread fast, eating through crates, metal, and bodies alike. The Reapers were breaking now, some trying to fight, others turning to run. Carter leveled his shotgun at the nearest one. "Don't let them leave," Rains nodded. "Copy that." They moved through the wreckage like executioners. The Reapers had spent their lives preying on the weak. Now they were the ones being hunted. Carter found himself face to face with a biker trying to crawl away, his leg mangled from the blast. He flipped the man over with his boot, pressing the barrel of his shotgun against his chest. "No more," Carter said. The biker's eyes widened with fear. He barely had time to scream before Carter pulled the trigger. Another one down, another step toward finishing this war. Silver's voice came through the radio. "That's it, no more movement." Carter exhaled. It was done. The Reapers were gone. The freight yard was burning, bodies littered across the pavement, smoke curling into the night sky. For the first time in years, Carter felt something close to peace. Izzy stepped forward, her hands still shaking. She looked at the destruction, at the bodies, at her grandfather standing in the middle of it all, still holding his shotgun like an extension of himself. She swallowed hard. "It's over." Carter nodded once. "Yeah." Izzy looked around. "What now?" Mendez wiped blood from his cheek. "We drink," Bishop chuckled. "And sleep for a damn week." Rains crossed his arms. "We clean up. We make sure none of these bastards come back." But Carter knew better. There was one last thing to do. He stepped over a fallen body, moving toward the only Reaper still alive. Razor. The biker was barely conscious, his body wrecked, blood pooling beneath him. He looked up at Carter with pure hatred in his eyes. "You think you won?" Razor rasped. Carter crouched, gripping the man's jaw, forcing him to look at the bodies around them. "No," he murmured. "I know I did." Razor grinned, his teeth stained red. "Someone else will take my place, someone worse." Carter stared at him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he pulled his knife and slit Razor's throat. The biker gurgled, choking, his body jerking once before going still. Carter wiped the blade clean on his shirt and stood. Then he turned back to Izzy. "It's over," he said again. This time, she believed him. The bodies still lay where they had fallen. The freight yard, once a fortress for the Reapers, now smoldered like a graveyard of bad men and worse decisions. The fire had begun to settle, leaving behind only the stench of blood, smoke, and burnt rubber. Carter stood in the wreckage, shotgun still clutched in his hands, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. His team had started moving the bodies, stacking them like discarded debris. The cleanup was necessary. Loose ends got people killed. Izzy had moved away from the carnage, standing near the edge of the yard. The flickering light from the fire cast long shadows across her face. She didn't say a word. She hadn't since Carter slit Razor's throat. She wasn't afraid, But she wasn't okay either. Mendez wiped the blood from his hands, nodding toward Carter. "We staying here much longer?" "No," Carter said. Silver's voice crackled in through the radio. "Perimeter clear, no sign of stragglers." "Good." Carter looked over at Rains. "Call it in." Rains smirked. "Cops or the cleaners?" "The cleaners," Carter said without hesitation. "Cops won't come out this far anyway, and if they did, they'd be looking for someone to pin this on." Rains nodded, already pulling out a burner phone. Carter exhaled. The war was over. The Reapers were finished. No one would be coming for Izzy ever again. But then, why didn't it feel finished? Something nagged at him, something buried deep in his gut. He had spent a lifetime trusting that instinct, and it had never failed him. Not once. He turned toward Izzy, watching her carefully. She had been strong through all of this, stronger than most, but even the strongest walls cracked under enough pressure. Carter walked over, slow and steady, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Talk to me." Izzy didn't look at him. She stared at the horizon, her jaw tight. "What do you want me to say?" "That you're okay." She let out a breath, something close to a laugh but without any humor. "I don't know what that even means anymore." Carter wasn't good at this. The talking. He had spent years barking orders, breaking men, leading soldiers into battle. But this was different. "You're free now," he said after a long moment. Izzy finally turned to face him. "Am I?" Carter narrowed his eyes. "Yes." She shook her head. "You don't get it, do you?" Carter was silent. Izzy gestured around them, at the bodies, the smoke, the destruction. This isn't just about me. It never was." Carter studied her. "Then tell me what it is about." Izzy's eyes darkened. "The girls, the ones they took, the ones who didn't have someone coming for them." Carter clenched his jaw. He had been so focused on destroying the Reapers that he hadn't thought about who was left behind. Izzy's voice was steady now, but there was something beneath it, something sharp and unshakable. "You didn't just kill a gang, Grandpa. You tore apart a whole operation, and that means there's a lot of girls out there with nowhere to go." Carter was silent, because she was right. Mendez walked over, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's got a point, old man." Rains finished his call, tucking the burner phone back into his jacket. "Heard something similar from our cleanup crew. They say the Reapers weren't just running their own thing. They were connected." Carter looked up. To who?" "Bigger players." Rains shrugged. "Drugs, weapons, trafficking. The Reapers were just one piece of something larger." Carter felt the weight settle on his shoulders. He had been ready to walk away, to take Izzy, get her somewhere safe, disappear again. But he knew better, because wars never end clean. He turned to Izzy. "What do you want to do?" She didn't hesitate. "We find them." Carter let out a slow breath. He looked at Mendez, at Rains, at Silver and Bishop. They had all followed him into battle without question. Now he was about to ask them for one more fight. Carter rolled his shoulders. "Then we start with the girls. We find them first." Rains smirked. "And after that?" Carter's expression was stone. "Then we burn the rest of them down." They moved out before sunrise. Carter drove, Izzy beside him in the passenger seat, her fingers drumming against her thigh. The others followed behind in a second vehicle, weapons stocked, ready for whatever came next. Izzy had made a few calls. She still had contacts, other girls who had escaped, others who had been waiting for someone to do what Carter had done. They pointed them to a location, an old warehouse near the docks. Not a headquarters, not a fortress like the freight yard, just a drop point. A place where girls were held before they were sold off to the highest bidder. Carter knew what he was about to walk into. He didn't care. They reached the docks just before dawn. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and rust. Seagulls screeched in the distance, the waves lapping against the piers. The warehouse was dark, barely more than a skeletal frame of rusted metal and shattered windows. But it wasn't empty. Carter spotted the first guard near the entrance, biker boots, leather vest, cigarette dangling from his lips. He wasn't Reapers, but he wasn't much different. Mendez was already moving before Carter even gave the signal. He slipped behind the man, one arm wrapping around his throat, the other driving a knife deep into his ribs. The body didn't even make a sound when it hit the pavement. Silva moved next, his rifle trained on the second sentry near the side of the building. One quick shot, and the man crumpled. They breached the warehouse in silence. Inside, the air was cold and stale, filled with the scent of sweat and despair. Carter spotted them instantly. 3 girls, huddled together in the corner, their wrists bound, their eyes wide with terror. Izzy rushed forward, cutting their restraints, whispering something Carter couldn't hear. Then, footsteps. Carter turned just in time to see the 3rd guard emerging from the back. The man's gun was already raised. Izzy saw it first. "Grandpa!" Carter moved before he could think. The bullet tore through the air, grazing his shoulder. He barely felt it. His shotgun roared in response. The guard's body slammed into the wall, leaving a smear of blood behind as he slid to the ground. Then silence, no alarms, no more footsteps, just bodies and breathing. Izzy pulled the girls to their feet, her hands steady. "Come on, we're getting you out of here." One of them, barely 18, bruised and shaking, looked up at Carter. "Are you the police?" she asked, her voice small. Carter hesitated. Then softly he said, "No." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded as if that was better. Carter turned to his team. "Let's move." As they left the warehouse, Izzy walked beside him. "This isn't going to stop, is it?" Carter exhaled. "No." She looked up at him. "Then we don't stop either." Carter nodded once. "No, they didn't. And they wouldn't. Not until every last one of them was dead." The air was thick with the scent of sweat, salt water, and blood. The warehouse at the docks was empty now, but the ghosts of the past lingered in the silence. Carter stood at the edge of the water, watching the first rays of sunlight creep over the horizon, turning the ocean into a churning mix of gold and black. He had spent his entire life moving from one battlefield to the next, but this one felt different, more personal. Izzy was behind him, quiet, watching the rescued girls as they huddled together near the trucks. 3 of them, barely adults, their faces pale and hollowed from days, maybe weeks of captivity. She had seen too many girls like them before. She had been one of them. Izzy crossed her arms, forcing the nausea down. She could still hear the gunfire in her head, still smell the death inside that warehouse. No matter how many times she blinked, she still saw the bodies. It should have felt like a victory, but it didn't, because it wasn't over. Carter turned back to the group, his expression unreadable. "They say anything yet?" Izzy shook her head. "They're still in shock. But I don't think this was a final stop. I think they were waiting for transport." "Meaning?" "Meaning someone was coming to get them," Izzy muttered. She turned toward him, her jaw tight. "And we just interrupted the supply line." Carter exhaled through his nose. He had known this wouldn't be clean. He had known taking out the Reapers wouldn't be the end of it. They had killed the messengers, but the people giving the orders were still out there. Rains emerged from the warehouse, wiping his hands on his jeans, checked the rest of the place, found some logs, ledgers, a few burner phones, nothing with names but plenty of locations. This wasn't a one-time thing, it was an operation. Carter met his gaze. "How big?" Rains shrugged. "Too big to walk away from." Mendez leaned against the truck, checking his ammo. "So what's next? We track the supply chain. Find out who's running this shit?" Izzy was the one who answered. "We don't find them." She looked up, her eyes cold and determined. "We make them come to us." The silence that followed was heavy. Carter studied her for a long moment. "You sure?" Izzy swallowed, but her voice didn't shake. "They think we're a problem. We make them prove it." Mendez chuckled, shaking his head. "Damn, girls got brass." Bishop smirked. "That's Carter's blood." Carter exhaled. He had spent his whole life making the hard choices, and now Izzy was standing there, ready to do the same. She was his granddaughter, through and through. He nodded once. "All right, we set the trap." The first step was making noise. They had destroyed a piece of the machine, but the rest of it was still running. Someone was expecting those girls to be delivered, and when they didn't show up, people would start asking questions. That's what Carter wanted. They staged the scene carefully. The bodies were left in the warehouse, strategically displayed, a warning to whoever came looking. The ledgers and burner phones were planted where they would be found, breadcrumbs leading back to Carter and his team. Then they waited. Izzy sat on the hood of the truck, staring at the water. She could feel Carter watching her from a few feet away, but she didn't look at him. "You don't have to do this," he said eventually. Izzy let out a short laugh. "Yeah, I do." Carter stepped closer. "You've been through enough." Izzy turned to him, and for the first time, Carter saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. "You think stopping now changes that?" she asked quietly. "You think this is about me?" Carter didn't answer, because he knew she was right. This wasn't about revenge. This was about everyone who never got saved. Raines's voice cut through the moment. "We got movement." Carter turned. Silver was watching from his sniper perch, eyes locked on the road. A black SUV rolled toward the warehouse, then another, then a third. Carter's hands clenched into fists. They had taken the bait. The SUVs pulled up slowly, engines rumbling in the stillness. Tinted windows, unmarked plates, professionals. Carter and his team watched from the shadows, spread out, ready. The doors opened and 4 men stepped out. They weren't bikers. No leather cuts, no gang tattoos. These men wore suits. Raines muttered under his breath. "Well, shit." Izzy narrowed her eyes. "This isn't a gang." Carter already knew. This wasn't the Reapers 2.0. This was something bigger. The lead man, a tall, silver-haired son of a bitch, adjusted his cuffs and looked at the warehouse. He took a slow breath, then exhaled through his nose. "Well," he muttered, shaking his head, "this is an issue." Carter stepped forward. He didn't draw his weapon. Not yet. The man's gaze snapped to him immediately. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the man smiled. "Walter Carter," he said smoothly. "I was hoping we'd get the chance to meet." Carter didn't blink. "Who are you?" The man spread his hands. "Just a businessman who just lost a very expensive shipment." His eyes flicked toward the bodies in the warehouse. "Sloppy work, by the way." Mendez growled. "You want to see sloppy, asshole?" Carter raised a hand, stopping him. He stared at the man in the suit. "You're the one running this?" The man chuckled. "Oh no, not me. I'm just a middleman. But my employers, they're very unhappy." Carter let the words settle. "You took the girls," he said. "And what? Sold them off?" The man smirked. "No, Mr. Carter. We moved people. For work. For business. For those willing to pay." Izzy's breath hitched. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palm. Carter felt his pulse slow. Not speed up. Slow. He exhaled. Then he drew his gun. The man in the suit didn't flinch. "That's a mistake," he said softly. Carter cocked the hammer. "No. Taking my granddaughter was a mistake." The man smiled again. "You killed the Reapers, burned their house to the ground. You think that means you won?" Carter's grip tightened. The man shook his head. "No, Mr. Carter. You just got the attention of people far worse." Then he slowly raised his hand, tapping the earpiece in his right ear. Carter heard it before he saw it. Engines, a lot of them. Izzy turned, her eyes widening. More SUVs, more motorcycles, more men. The silver-haired man grinned. "Now," he said, "let's talk about what happens next." Carter exhaled slowly. Then, without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. The moment Carter pulled the trigger, everything exploded into chaos. The bullet tore through the silver-haired man's shoulder, sending him spinning backward, his pristine suit instantly soaked with blood. His expression twisted in shock, then fury, as he hit the pavement. And then the gunfire started. The SUVs behind him erupted with movement, doors flying open as armed men poured out, weapons drawn. Silenced submachine guns and pistols, not the reckless, untrained, wild shooting of the Reapers, but coordinated, precise professionals. Carter ducked left, rolling behind a stack of shipping crates just as bullets ripped through the air. The first burst chewed through the metal beside him, sparks flying in all directions. Mendez was already moving. He fired off 3 quick shots, dropping one of the suited men before disappearing behind another container. Silva's rifle cracked from above, his first shot slamming into the windshield of an SUV, killing the driver instantly. The vehicle lurched forward before veering off and slamming into a light pole. Izzy hit the ground behind the truck, her breath sharp and fast. She wasn't helpless, but this wasn't a fight she could win. Not with this many men. Rains was closest to her. He reached down, yanking her by the arm and pulling her toward better cover. "Stay down!" he barked, his pistol already raised. The silver-haired man was still alive, his men dragging him back toward a vehicle, but his expression had changed. This wasn't some gangland execution gone wrong. This was a real fight, and Carter knew what that meant. These men weren't reapers. They weren't just running some back-alley trafficking ring. They were something bigger. And now they knew exactly who they were dealing with. A fresh wave of gunfire raked the yard, bullets shredding through crates, barrels, and glass. Bishop cursed over the radio. "They've got numbers, Carter. We need a goddamn plan." Carter reloaded his shotgun, pumping a fresh shell into place. "We finish this." He swung out from cover, firing mid-step. The blast caught a man mid-run, hurling him backward. Another turned toward him. Carter barely had time to shift his aim before Silva's sniper round took him clean through the throat. The gunfire intensified. The enemy was advancing, pushing toward them, moving with trained efficiency. Not gangsters, mercenaries. Carter cursed under his breath. The firefight was turning against them. Rains gritted his teeth, reloading as he ducked behind a concrete barrier. "We're getting boxed in here, Walt." Mendez slid in beside him, pressing a fresh magazine into his pistol. "Yeah, we're running out of space, old man." Carter knew they were right. They couldn't win this head-on. They needed to change the battlefield. His eyes snapped toward the fuel storage tanks near the loading dock. "Bishop!" he growled into the radio. "Blow the tanks!" Bishop's laughter crackled through. "Finally, some fireworks." A second later, he hit the detonator. The explosion ripped through the dock, sending a tower of fire and debris into the air. The shockwave was instant, knocking men off their feet, throwing bodies and burning debris across the yard. The mercenaries scrambled, some diving for cover, others running for the SUVs. The moment of disarray was all Carter needed. "Move!" he shouted. His team surged forward, guns blazing. Mendez hit a running slide, rolling behind a fallen SUV before putting 2 shots into a man's chest. Silva kept picking off targets, his sniper rifle spitting death with mechanical precision. Rains took out a knife, grabbing one of the wounded mercenaries and plunging it into his throat, then tossing the body aside like a piece of garbage. Carter advanced, moving through the fire and wreckage, his shotgun kicking back against his shoulder with every devastating shot. Izzy followed. Staying low, keeping close to the cover Rains had pulled her toward, and then a scream. Not one of their men, one of the girls. Carter's head snapped toward the remaining SUV, just in time to see 2 of the mercenaries dragging one of the rescued girls toward the vehicle. Izzy saw it too. Her face changed instantly. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest gun, a discarded pistol from a dead Reaper, and sprinted forward. "Izzy!" Carter barked. She didn't stop. The mercenary with the girl turned, eyes widening as Izzy charged at them, gun raised with both hands. She fired once. The bullet hit the mercenary in the leg, sending him crashing to the ground. The second spun toward her, gun already aimed. A shotgun blast tore through his chest before he could fire. Carter lowered his weapon, stepping forward as the man collapsed in a heap. The girl scrambled away, sobbing, clutching at her bleeding wrists. Izzy stood frozen, staring at the gun in her hands. Carter grabbed her wrist, steady but firm. "Izzy!" Her breath came fast, shallow. The gun trembled in her grip. She had never killed before, but she had been ready to. Carter eased the pistol from her hands, setting it aside. "Look at me." Izzy's eyes snapped to his. "You did good," Carter said. No judgment, no softness, just truth. She swallowed hard, nodding. Then she turned away from the body. There were still enemies left. The silver-haired man was staggering toward the SUV, his white dress shirt stained red, his breathing ragged. Carter moved toward him. The man looked up, his eyes burning. You don't get it, do you?" He laughed, blood dripping from his lips. Carter aimed his shotgun at his chest. "Who are you working for?" The man coughed, shaking his head. "You think this ends here?" He grinned, teeth red with blood. "You just started a war, old man." Carter's expression didn't change. He pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared one last time, and the silver-haired man collapsed, his body limp and broken on the pavement. Silence settled. The mercenaries were dead. The girls were safe. The fire still burned behind them, thick black smoke rising into the sky. Izzy exhaled slowly, staring at the destruction. "It's over." Carter looked at her. Then he turned toward the remaining burner phones on the dead men's bodies. He picked one up, scrolling through the last few messages. One number came up, again and again, one word attached to it. "Buyer." Carter's stomach turned to stone. He turned back to Izzy. "It's not over," he said quietly. She met his gaze, something dark and knowing settling into her expression. Carter dialed the number. The phone rang once. Then a voice answered. "Who the hell is this?" Carter exhaled slowly. "The man who's coming for you." Then he ended the call. No hesitation, no mercy, no escape. Carter dropped the burner phone into the blood-stained dirt. The call had been made. The enemy, whoever they were, now knew they had a problem, and that problem wasn't going away. The others stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling over them like dust from the still-burning warehouse. Izzy exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind something heavier, the realization that this wasn't over, not even close. She had fired a gun. She had been ready to kill someone. And now she felt more ready than ever. Mendez nudged one of the dead mercenaries with his boot. "So, who do we think we just pissed off?" Rains let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Someone with a lot of money and a lot of bodies to throw at us." Carter was already thinking 2 steps ahead. These weren't foot soldiers. They were enforcers, professionals. He glanced at the burner phones scattered across the ground. And professionals work for someone. Silva, still watching from his sniper perch, muttered through the radio, "Then we need to figure out who." Bishop crouched near one of the corpses, searching the pockets. He pulled out a second phone, this one different, sleek, high-end, encrypted. His eyebrows raised. "Bingo!" Mendez stepped closer, whistling. "That's a government-grade device." Carter took it from Bishop, turning it over in his hands. "Somebody very high up wants their operations kept quiet." Izzy frowned. "If they're that powerful, how do we get to them?" Carter didn't hesitate. "We follow the money." They moved quickly, gathering weapons, supplies, anything they could carry. The fire at the warehouse would draw attention soon, and they needed to be gone before any cleanup crew arrived. The rescued girls were loaded into the second truck, their nightmare finally over, at least for now. Izzy sat in the back with them, checking their injuries, talking to them the way only someone who had lived through it could. Carter watched her for a long moment. He had spent so much time thinking about getting her out, about saving her. But she didn't need saving anymore. She was becoming something else, something stronger, something dangerous. Mendez leaned against the hood of the truck, arms crossed. "So where to, boss?" Carter held up the encrypted phone. "We crack this." Rains raised an eyebrow. "And who the hell's gonna do that?" "Last I checked, none of us were hackers." Bishop smirked. "I know a guy." Carter turned to him. "Can we trust him?" Bishop hesitated. "No, but he owes me a favor." That was good enough. They drove through the night, heading toward the hacker's location, an old auto shop just outside the city, a place buried under layers of false businesses and off-the-books transactions. The man they were looking for went by the name King, and he had 2 things Carter needed: loyalty to Bishop and an appetite for breaking into things he shouldn't. The auto shop looked abandoned from the outside, but Carter knew better. Places like this never truly slept. Bishop knocked on the rusted door in a specific pattern. A few seconds passed. Then a slot slid open, revealing a pair of suspicious, bloodshot eyes. King's voice was low, irritated. "Who the hell?" Then his eyes widened. "Shit. Bishop?" Bishop grinned. "Been a while." The door unlocked instantly, and they stepped inside. King was a thin man, late 40s, covered in tattoos and paranoia. His workshop was filled with half-assembled computers, circuit boards, and enough illegal tech to make the FBI sweat. King eyed Carter and the others. "Jesus, you brought company." Bishop tossed him the encrypted phone. "We need this cracked." King caught it, turning it over in his hands. "This is high-end military encryption." He looked up. "Where the hell did you get this?" Carter's voice was steady. "Off a dead man." King hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay, give me an hour." 1 hour turned into 3. King worked in silence, his fingers flying over the keyboard, muttering to himself. The others stayed close, watching, waiting. Izzy sat on an overturned crate, arms wrapped around herself. She wasn't cold, but she felt restless, her mind racing. Carter sat beside her. "You all right?" Izzy looked at him. "Are you?" Carter thought about it, then shook his head. "No." Izzy exhaled. "Me neither." Carter hesitated, then said, "You did good back there." Izzy's jaw clenched. "I hesitated." "You're supposed to." Izzy turned to him, eyes sharp. "Did you?" Carter didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. Before either of them could say anything else, King let out a long whistle. "Boys," he muttered, "you just kicked a hornet's nest." They stepped forward. King turned the screen toward them. The phone had one active signal, a traceable financial transaction sent just before the mercenaries arrived at the docks. Mendez leaned in, reading the numbers. "That's a lot of zeros." Izzy squinted at the sender's information. "Who the hell is Solace International?" King chuckled darkly. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't want to know." Carter's patience thinned. "Tell us anyway." King exhaled. "Solace International isn't a company. It's a front." "For what?" King tapped the screen. "For whoever really runs this operation. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking, you name it, they fund it." Rains crossed his arms. "Where are they based?" King sighed. "That's the bad news." Carter narrowed his eyes. "And the good news?" King smirked. "You're gonna love this." He tapped a final key, pulling up a location. A luxury high-rise in downtown L.A. Izzy frowned. "A corporate office?" King nodded. "Nah, not just any office. The office. Whoever runs this mess, they're sitting pretty on the top floor." Carter's expression darkened. They had spent so much time fighting from the bottom, tearing apart biker gangs, taking out foot soldiers, burning down supply chains. But now they were staring at the top of the food chain. Carter turned to the others. "This is the last stop." Izzy's breath hitched. "You mean we end it?" Carter said. Mendez cracked his knuckles. "Shit, about time." Rains grinned. "I do love field trips." Bishop loaded a fresh clip into his pistol. "So what's the play, boss?" Carter didn't hesitate. "We go in, we get names, and then—" His expression was cold. "We burn it to the ground." Izzy nodded once. She wasn't scared anymore. She was ready. The war was almost over, and it was time for one last battle. Los Angeles glittered like broken glass beneath the moonlight, its skyline rising above the filth and violence that thrived in its shadows. Somewhere in that jungle of steel and neon, hidden behind layers of wealth, power, and secrecy, the real enemy sat in a high-rise office, untouched by the bloodshed they orchestrated. That was about to change. Carter sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV, his fingers wrapped around the grip of his Glock 19, resting in his lap. The others were with him, Rains, Mendez, Bishop, Silva, and Izzy. They had been through hell together, but this was different. This wasn't just a mission, this was the final act. Izzy sat beside him, quiet, her hands gripping her own weapon. Carter had taught her how to shoot when she was younger, but now she didn't need his help. She had become something else entirely. They all had. The SUV rolled to a stop 2 blocks away from the target, Solace International's headquarters, a sleek 40-story high-rise in the heart of the city, built with blood money and corporate lies. Bishop whistled low as he peered out the window. "That's a lot of glass." Mendez checked his watch. "Security rotations run on 15-minute intervals. Once we're inside, we move fast." Silva tapped his earpiece. "Sniper nest is set. I've got your overwatch, but don't expect me to stop a goddamn SWAT team." Carter nodded. "We're not leaving a mess this time." Rains smirked. "I assume that means we kill everyone quietly." Carter exhaled slowly. "We go in silent, but if it gets loud." His fingers tightened around the Glock. "Then we make damn sure no one walks out alive." They moved fast. A delivery truck pulled up to the service entrance, right on schedule. Bishop and Mendez had bribed a driver earlier that day. $1,000 and the promise of not getting shot was enough to get them inside. The truck's rear doors opened and Carter's team slipped out like shadows, weapons suppressed, movements precise. The service entrance was guarded by 2 men, hired security, not mercenaries. That made it easier. Bishop grabbed the first one, snapping his neck with one quick jerk. Mendez pressed his silencer against the second guard's temple. A quiet phut, and the body slumped to the ground. No alarms, no noise, they were inside. Izzy stayed close to Carter, her breath steady but her fingers flexing against the grip of her pistol. This wasn't like before. There was no fire, no reckless bloodbath. This was surgical, and Carter was the scalpel. They moved through the back corridors, bypassing cameras, dodging security patrols. The objective was simple: get to the top floor. Find the man in charge. End him. Every move was calculated, every breath precise. But then, a problem. As they reached the elevator bay, a new voice crackled over the radio. "Silva. Security just doubled at the front entrance. Armed men. These aren't rent-a-cops." Carter's jaw clenched. They knew. Mendez cursed under his breath. "They're expecting us." Bishop sighed. "Then let's not keep 'em waiting." Carter turned to Rains. "Plan B." Rains grinned, pulling out a small EMP device from his pack. "I do love a good backup plan." He activated it. The building's power flickered, not enough to cause an alarm, just enough to disable the cameras and security locks. For 60 seconds, they moved. The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped inside, weapons raised. Izzy's heart pounded as Carter pressed the button for the top floor. No turning back now. The executive suite was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, a panoramic view of a city built on greed and corruption. And at the center of it all, Alexander Vaughn, the man behind Solace International. He stood behind a sleek, glass desk, his expression unreadable as Carter and his team spilled into the room, weapons drawn. Vaughn was in his 60s, tall, lean, with silver hair slicked back and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't flinch, didn't panic. He just sighed. "I was wondering when you'd come." Carter raised his gun. "Hands where I can see them." Vaughn obeyed, slowly, deliberately. Izzy's eyes burned with hate as she stepped forward. "You sold them," she said. Her voice was low, venomous. "You sold people." Vaughn met her gaze, unfazed. "And you killed mine." Izzy's hands trembled. Mendez muttered, "Can we shoot this asshole already?" But Carter wasn't done. "You're going to tell me everything," he said. Vaughn smiled, shaking his head. "No, I'm not." And then he pressed a button under his desk. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a shotgun mounted underneath. Vaughn grabbed it in an instant, raising it toward Izzy. Carter shot first. The bullet hit Vaughn's wrist, shattering bone, forcing him to drop the weapon with a scream. Before he could recover, Izzy was on him. She grabbed him by the collar, shoving him back against the desk, her gun pressed against his ribs. "Where are the others?" she snarled. Vaughn laughed through the pain, blood dripping from his arm. "You think this ends with me?" He shook his head. "There will always be another." Izzy's hand shook, her finger tightening on the trigger. Rains watched her carefully. "Kid, you sure you want to do this?" Izzy's breath came hard and fast. This man had built the system that nearly destroyed her, that destroyed so many others. Carter stood beside her. His voice was steady. "If you pull that trigger, you don't come back from it." Izzy swallowed. Her grip on the gun tightened. Then she stepped back. "I want him to know," she said quietly, "that he lost." Vaughn's expression darkened. Carter nodded. Then he turned to Mendez. "Make the call." Mendez grinned, pulling out a second burner phone. 30 seconds later, a fire alarm blared through the building. Vaughn's eyes widened. "What did you do?" Carter leaned in close. "We sent everything to the feds," he murmured. Vaughn's face drained of color. The ledgers, the transaction logs, the names, everything. In a matter of hours, Solace International would be finished. Carter straightened. "Let's go." As they walked away, Vaughn's voice echoed behind them. "You think this ends with me?" he snarled. "You think you did something here?" Carter paused at the doorway. Then he turned back, raising his gun one last time. A single shot. Vaughn collapsed onto the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Carter exhaled. Now it's over. Izzy watched him. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't shocked. She just nodded because she knew this was how wars ended. The fire alarm screamed through the executive suite, an artificial wail of panic that clashed with the eerie silence of death. Vaughn's lifeless body lay sprawled on the marble floor, his blood spreading in slow crimson tendrils. Outside, sirens were already piercing the night, cutting through the city's usual chaos like a blade. Carter didn't look back. He never did. "Move," he ordered. Izzy was the first to step away, her face unreadable, her movements quick and precise. The rest of the team fell in behind them, weapons still hot, adrenaline still pumping. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the entire building was swarmed with cops, federal agents, or, worse, whoever was pulling Vaughn's strings. They took the back stairwell, avoiding the main elevators, their boots echoing against steel steps as they descended. Rains led the way, pistol in hand, scanning each landing as they moved. Izzy kept close behind Carter, her breath sharp and controlled. She had been prepared to kill Vaughn herself, but Carter had done it, and now that the shot had been fired, she wasn't sure what she felt. Relief, rage, something else? None of it mattered now. The fight wasn't over yet. Mendez reached the exit first, pushing open the door just wide enough to peek outside. He swore under his breath. "Company!" Carter stepped beside him, peering through the gap. 2 black SUVs were parked outside, engines still running. 3 men stood near them, weapons visible beneath their suits. Not cops, not mercenaries. Something else. "Who the hell are these guys?" Bishop whispered. "Doesn't matter," Carter said. They were in the way. Rains cracked his neck. "Silent or loud?" Carter's expression was stone. "Loud," Bishop grinned. "Music to my goddamn ears." Mendez was the first out the door, gun already raised. The first shot hit the closest man in the throat before he could even react. The second was dead before he hit the pavement. The third scrambled for cover. Silver's sniper round found him first. Carter moved fast, heading straight for the nearest SUV, his team covering him. As he swung the driver's door open, the man inside jerked in surprise, reaching for his pistol. Carter pressed his own against the man's temple. "Drive," he ordered. The man hesitated. Carter pulled the trigger. Blood splattered against the windshield. "Guess I'm driving," Mendez muttered, shoving the body aside and hopping into the driver's seat. "Everyone in." Izzy climbed into the passenger side, her hands still trembling, though she wouldn't let anyone see it. The others piled in. The moment the doors slammed shut, Mendez threw the SUV into reverse, tires screeching as they tore out of the parking lot. Behind them, distant sirens grew louder. Silver's voice crackled over the radio. "You're clear, but I wouldn't stick around. Feds are definitely going to be asking questions." Carter exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "We won't be here when they do." The drive was silent. No one spoke. The tension was thick, but it wasn't just the escape. It was everything. The end of the Reapers, the girls they had saved, the names they had exposed, Vaughn's death, and the fact that someone bigger was still out there. Izzy stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. She had spent years trapped, thinking there was no way out, that the world was unforgiving, that no one would come for people like her. Then Carter had shown up, shot his way through hell, and dragged her back into the light. Now she knew there were more, and she wasn't going to walk away. Carter saw it in her eyes before she even spoke. "I want in," she said. Carter didn't blink. "You already are." Izzy shook her head. "No, not like that." She turned to him, jaw clenched. "I don't want to be protected. I want to fight." Carter studied her for a long moment. The girl he had come to save was gone. In her place was something else entirely. "You sure?" he asked quietly. Izzy nodded. "You're not the only one who can do this." Mendez let out a breath. "Kid's got fire." Bishop smirked. "Carter blood." Rains grunted. "She's got the right to make her own call." Carter exhaled. He had spent his whole life trying to keep the people he cared about out of this world. But Izzy? She was already in it. He gave her a single nod. "All right." Izzy's shoulders squared. "Then tell me what's next." Carter reached into his pocket, pulling out another burner phone. He tossed it into her lap. "Call them." Izzy frowned. "Who?" Carter's voice was calm and cold. "The ones who funded Vaughn." Izzy stared at the phone. The same people who had ruined her life, who had taken so many lives, were waiting on the other end. She picked it up. She dialed. It rang. And then a voice answered, calm, controlled. "Ah, you must be Mr. Carter." Izzy's grip tightened. Carter leaned forward, his voice low. "We're coming for you next." A chuckle. "I look forward to it." The call ended. Izzy exhaled, her heartbeat steady now. She turned to Carter. He didn't have to ask if she was ready, because she was. No more running, no more fear. It was time to finish what they started. And this time, they weren't just burning one gang to the ground. They were coming for everyone. The desert stretched out before them, empty and vast, illuminated only by the headlights of their convoy cutting through the darkness. The city was far behind them now, but Carter knew the war had only just begun. Izzy sat in the passenger seat of the lead SUV, her fingers wrapped tightly around the burner phone. The last words from the voice on the other end still rang in her ears. "I look forward to it." It hadn't been a threat. It had been a promise. Carter drove, silent, focused. His mind was already running ahead, calculating moves, setting traps, thinking like the soldier he had spent decades being. This was different from the fights before. The Reapers, they had been scum, but they had been small time. The people they were going after now, they were powerful, connected, untouchable, until now. Mendez, riding in the back seat, let out a low whistle. "Man, I thought the Reapers were bad, but this is like knocking on the devil's front door and asking for a fight." Bishop chuckled. "Good thing Carter's the kind of guy who kicks the door down." Rains exhaled. "Yeah, but this isn't a gang. This is a whole operation, organized, funded, shielded." He glanced at Carter. "You sure about this?" Carter kept his eyes on the road. "We've already started." Izzy clenched her fists. "We finish it." No hesitation. "No fear." Bishop grinned. "Damn, kid, I like your style." Mendez leaned forward. "All right, so what's the plan?" "We can't exactly storm a corporate high-rise with assault rifles and hope for the best." Carter's voice was steady. "We make them come to us." Rains smirked. "You've got something in mind." Carter nodded. "We cut off their legs. Money, logistics, security. We take everything away from them, piece by piece." Mendez ran a hand through his hair. "Shit, so we're robbing them now." "Not robbing," Izzy corrected. "Breaking them." Carter pulled off the highway onto a dirt road, leading them deeper into the desert. "First stop," he said. The lights of a private airstrip came into view, a single hangar, a few parked planes, and one man waiting for them under the dim glow of a floodlight. King, their hacker, the man who had cracked Vaughn's encrypted phone. The moment they pulled up, King raised his hands. "Just so we're clear, I'm not going to prison for this." Bishop smirked. "Relax, we're just here for information." King exhaled. "Fine. But after this, I'm disappearing." Carter stepped forward. "What did you find?" King led them inside the hangar, where his laptop sat open on a workbench. The screen was filled with files, encrypted emails, offshore accounts, a goldmine of information. These guys, King said, scrolling through the data, they're not just running a trafficking ring, they're in everything. Government contracts, black market arms deals, political payoffs. He pointed to a highlighted file. And this is the guy pulling the strings. A name appeared on the screen. Randall Grayson. Mendez frowned. Never heard of him. You wouldn't, King muttered. He's not a public name, but he's the money behind all of it. Izzy's stomach turned. Where is he? King smirked. That's the fun part. He typed a few keys, pulling up satellite footage of a compound in Mexico, nestled in the mountains, surrounded by armed security and private helicopters. Meet La Fortaleza, King said. It's a fortress, and Grayson's inside. Silence. Then Bishop let out a low chuckle. So, we're storming a drug lord-style compound now? Jesus, Carter, you never do things halfway. Rains folded his arms. We're gonna need more firepower, Carter nodded. And a way in. King leaned against the table. Well, I might have an idea for that. 3 days later, they were in Mexico. The plan? Infiltration, disruption, elimination. Grayson thought he was untouchable, hiding behind his wealth and security. But Carter had spent his life taking down men like him. The first step was getting inside. King had forged credentials for Rains and Bishop, posing them as arms dealers looking to buy from one of Grayson's suppliers. The others would follow behind, sneaking in through a service entrance once the deal was in motion. If it went sideways, they had enough explosives to level half the compound. Izzy adjusted the earpiece in her ear, checking her pistol one last time. Carter caught her looking at him. You good? She nodded. Yeah. You sure? Izzy met his gaze. You're not the only one who can do this. Carter exhaled. Then he handed her a knife. Then don't hesitate. She took it. She wouldn't. Rains and Bishop walked through the front gates. Armed guards watched them, their hands resting on AK-47s and sidearms, scanning every movement. The main courtyard was massive, lined with palm trees, expensive cars, and a central fountain made of black marble. Grayson's men were everywhere. Inside, in the lavish private lounge, Randall Grayson finally appeared. Tall, refined, a man who had never known fear. He smiled as he sat across from Rains and Bishop, sipping an expensive glass of scotch. So, Grayson said, let's talk business. Outside, in the darkness, Carter, Izzy, Mendez, and Silva moved into position. It was almost time. Back in the lounge, Rains lit a cigar, playing his role perfectly. We're interested in a long-term relationship, he said, but we need to know we're working with the right people. Grayson chuckled. You came to the right place, Bishop smirked. Then prove it. Grayson's eyes gleamed. How? Outside, Carter pressed a detonator. A power surge rocked the compound. The lights flickered, the security feeds scrambled, and the alarms blared. Inside, Grayson's expression darkened. Rains leaned forward, blowing out a cloud of smoke. Guess you didn't. Grayson's men reached for their weapons. Bishop moved first, slamming his elbow into one of them, yanking a pistol free, and firing point-blank into another. Outside, Carter and Izzy breached the compound. Gunfire erupted. Mendez took out 2 guards with precise shots, Silva covering from a rooftop. Izzy moved like a shadow, cutting down a sentry before he could sound the alarm. Carter pushed forward, shotgun raised, hunting one man. Grayson. The final piece of the puzzle, the last monster left to kill. Grayson tried to run. Carter followed. Izzy was right beside him. This was it. The war was about to end, and they were going to make damn sure it ended their way. The compound was burning. Smoke curled into the night sky as gunfire echoed through the mountains. Carter moved like a predator, shotgun raised, his boots crunching against shattered tile and broken glass. Grayson was running. Cowards always did. Izzy was right beside him, pistol tight in her grip, her breath steady. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Grayson's personal guards, the last of them, were desperate now, pushing back as Carter's team cut through them like a scalpel through flesh. Mendez and Rains pinned them down from the main courtyard, while Silva's rifle whispered death from above. Every shot counted, every bullet found its mark. And Grayson, he was heading toward the helipad. Carter saw it now, the escape plan. A private helicopter, engines warming up, blades slowly turning, waiting for one man. Carter clenched his jaw. Not tonight. He pushed forward, cutting through the wreckage, his team close behind. Grayson disappeared through a set of reinforced doors, two of his remaining guards slipping in behind him. Carter and Izzy followed. Mendez's voice crackled over the radio. "We'll cover you from here. Go." They went. The hallway leading to the helipad was a kill box. Long, narrow, no cover. Izzy spotted movement first. Two at the end. Carter didn't wait. He fired once, his shotgun shattering one man's ribs, sending him slamming into the wall. Izzy fired twice. The second man fell, his gun clattering to the floor. They pushed forward. The reinforced steel doors leading to the helipad were closing. Grayson was seconds from getting away. Carter slammed into the doors, wedging his boot between them before they could fully shut. The motors groaned, but he pushed harder, muscles straining. Then Izzy was there, grabbing a fallen rifle, jamming it between the gears, forcing the doors open just enough. Carter kicked them wide. The wind hit them first, the roar of the helicopter's blades spinning faster, sending dust and smoke whipping through the rooftop. Grayson stood at the edge of the pad, his suit torn, blood on his cheek, his expression caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. Two bodyguards stood between him and Carter, their weapons raised. Carter didn't hesitate. One shot. The first man dropped. A second shot. The other staggered, gasping as blood bubbled from his throat. Grayson stumbled back, nearly losing his balance. "No, no!" he shouted over the wind. "You don't understand what you're doing!" Carter stepped forward, calm as death itself. Izzy was right beside him, her pistol locked on target. "You sold people," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "And now you're gonna answer for it." Grayson laughed, but there was panic in it now. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered. "You're just scratching the surface. There's always someone else. Always." Carter took another step. "Then we'll find them too." Grayson's face twisted with hate. "You think you're heroes?" Izzy exhaled. "No." And then she pulled the trigger. The bullet slammed into Grayson's knee, dropping him to the ground. He screamed, clutching his leg, his breath ragged. Carter stood over him, shotgun aimed at his chest. "Who's left?" he demanded. Grayson coughed, laughing through the pain. "It won't matter. They'll find you, and they'll bury you." Izzy's jaw clenched. "Give us a name." Grayson's smile was red with blood. "Go to hell." Carter nodded once. "You first." He pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast tore through Grayson's chest, slamming him flat onto the helipad. His body twitched once, and then he was gone. Izzy exhaled slowly, lowering her gun. The wind roared around them, the helicopter's engines still spinning. Carter stepped over Grayson's corpse, grabbing the pilot by the collar, yanking him from the cockpit. "Out!" The man scrambled away, eyes wide with terror. Carter turned to Izzy. "You ever fly before?" Izzy blinked. "No." Carter climbed into the pilot's seat, checking the controls. "Guess you're about to learn." She hesitated, then climbed in beside him. Behind them, Mendez and Rains were clearing the last of the guards, while Silver's rifle kept watch from the opposite rooftop. Carter keyed the radio. "We're done here. Get to the extraction point." Mendez smirked. "Taking the fancy exit, huh?" Carter grinned. "Always." The helicopter lifted off, leaving the burning compound behind, smoke curling into the sky. Izzy sat beside Carter, her pulse still pounding. For the first time in years, she felt free. She looked at her grandfather. "It's over, isn't it?" Carter scanned the city stretching below them. The Reapers were gone. Vaughn was gone. Grayson was gone. But something still didn't feel finished. Carter exhaled. For now. Izzy didn't press him. She knew. She felt it too. Because the truth was, wars like this, they never really ended. They just changed shape, and when the next fight came, they'd be ready, together. The helicopter disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but ashes and memories. The helicopter cut through the sky like a ghost, high above the desert, heading toward nowhere and everywhere at once. Below, The burning wreckage of Grayson's compound still smoldered, the last remnant of a man who had thought himself untouchable. Carter knew better. Nobody was untouchable. Izzy sat beside him in the cockpit, staring out at the vast emptiness of the world below. She had always thought freedom would feel lighter, like a breath of fresh air after being trapped for so long. But it didn't. It felt heavy, because now she had a choice to make. Mendez's voice crackled through the radio. "All right, old man, where the hell are we headed?" Carter didn't answer at first. His hands were steady on the controls, his mind moving faster than the rotor blades slicing through the night. There was always another war, but this time he wasn't sure what came next. Rains spoke next, his voice lower, calmer. "We did what we came to do. We burned them down." "Did we?" Izzy muttered. Silence. Bishop sighed. "You know how this works. There's always someone else, another name, another buyer, another monster hiding behind a suit." Izzy clenched her jaw. That was the problem, wasn't it? They had won, but only for now. Carter exhaled. "We regroup, we rest, then we decide." Mendez snorted. "And here I thought retirement was an option." Nobody laughed, because they all knew the truth. None of them were made for retirement. They landed at a safe house deep in the Arizona desert, an old airstrip, abandoned but functional, the kind of place no one looked twice at. Carter shut down the chopper, stepping out into the cool night air. The others followed, quiet, exhausted. Izzy wasn't tired, though. She was restless. She followed Carter to the edge of the airstrip, where he stood staring at the empty road ahead. "Something's bothering you," she said. Carter sighed. This isn't the end. Izzy knew that, but she still wanted to hear him say it. "They'll come looking," she murmured. Carter nodded. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually someone will pick up where Grayson left off." Izzy folded her arms. "Then we get to them first." Carter looked at her, really looked at her. She had changed. This wasn't the same girl he had fought so hard to save. She was something else now, something dangerous. Rains and Mendez walked over, hands in their pockets, watching the horizon. "What's the play, Walt?" Rains asked. Carter didn't answer right away, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure. They spent the next few days off the grid, watching, waiting, listening. King had disappeared, like he said he would, but not before sending Carter one last message, a list of names, politicians, CEOs, military contractors, people involved in the same operation Grayson had been running. Izzy read the list in silence, her fingers tightening around the paper. "We can't let them walk." Carter exhaled. "No, we can't." But this wasn't a gang. This wasn't some criminal empire. This was the system itself. Mendez read over her shoulder. "Jesus, you take this list to the right people and the whole damn house of cards comes down." Rains chuckled. "Or the wrong people, and we're dead before we hit the ground." Izzy looked at Carter. "So what do we do?" Carter stared at the names. Then he tore the list in half. Izzy's eyes widened. "What the hell?" Carter's voice was low, steady, final. "We don't hand this off to anyone." She was furious. "Why the hell not?" Carter turned to her. "Because this isn't a courtroom fight, Izzy. You think these people don't have backup plans, connections. Burning them publicly won't stop them." Izzy clenched her fists. "Then what? We let them go?" "No," Carter said. "We do what we do best." Mendez grinned. "We hunt." Izzy's heart slowed, something cold and sharp settling inside her. Carter handed her half of the torn list. "Pick one," he said. Izzy stared at the names. Then, slowly, she smiled. And just like that, the war wasn't over. It was just getting started. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast and empty expanse, mirroring the silence inside Carter's safe house. The air was thick with something unspoken, the weight of decisions made, of lives taken, of battles still waiting in the dark. Izzy sat at the worn wooden table, the torn half of the list of names resting in front of her. She ran her fingers over it slowly, her mind turning over every possibility, every outcome, every bullet yet to be fired. Carter stood near the window, staring out at nothing. His posture was calm, but his mind was already at war. Mendez and Rains sat on the couch, cleaning their weapons. They knew what came next. Bishop leaned against the counter, watching Izzy. "So?" he asked, his voice easy but carrying weight. "You pick one yet?" Izzy didn't look up. She already had. "Douglas Kane," she said finally. The room stilled. Carter turned from the window. Rains let out a slow exhale. "That's a big one." Douglas Kane wasn't just another name on a list. He was money. He was power. A former intelligence officer turned corporate fixer, Kane had spent the last decade cleaning up the messes of the powerful, ensuring that men like Vaughn and Grayson never left trails. Izzy's voice was steady. "If we take him out, we cut off the lifeline." Bishop smirked. "I like her thinking." Mendez chuckled, shaking his head. "You sure you weren't a mercenary and a past-life kid?" Izzy's jaw clenched. "I was a prisoner." Silence. Carter walked over, picking up the paper, scanning the name. Kane operated out of New York, moving between high-rise offices, private estates, and underground meeting spots no one was supposed to know about. But Carter had spent his life finding men who thought they were ghosts. "He's careful," Rains said, standing, "paranoid. He never moves without a security team. You don't get close to him unless he wants you to." Carter nodded. "Then we make him want to." Izzy met his gaze. "How?" Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. "We take something he values." Step 1. Disruption New York was a different battlefield. Los Angeles had been a war fought in the shadows. The desert had been a battlefield without walls. But New York was a fortress. Cameras everywhere, law enforcement everywhere, eyes everywhere, and Douglas Kane thrived in it. He didn't hide. He didn't have to. Kane was a man who walked in the open, surrounded by bodyguards in tailored suits, operating behind corporate shields and government contacts. But even men like him had weak points. It started small. A shell company tied to Kane's operation suddenly froze. Funds vanished, assets seized in a legal loophole Carter had orchestrated. Then, an apartment safe house linked to one of his men was raided. The kind of quiet federal bust that made people start asking questions. Then one of his closest lieutenants disappeared. Not dead, not tortured, just gone, because Carter wanted Kane to feel what loss felt like before the killing started. Step 2. Pressure. Kane was too smart to panic, but he was curious. When things started falling apart, he didn't run. He started digging, trying to figure out who was coming for him. That's when Izzy made her move. A simple message sent through one of Kane's secure channels. "You don't know me, but you know why I'm here." Kane's reply came instantly. "Tell me what you want." Izzy smirked as she typed, "I want you to suffer." Carter watched from across the table. "You sure about this?" Izzy didn't hesitate. Yes. Kane was too arrogant to ignore the challenge. Within hours, his people were looking for them, combing through every piece of information, every lead. And Carter made sure they found exactly what he wanted them to find. A location, a trap. Step 3. Execution. The warehouse was cold, abandoned for years, the kind of place where nobody heard gunfire. Carter stood in the shadows, his shotgun resting against his shoulder, waiting. Izzy was beside him, calm, focused, ready. She had chosen this. She was done waiting for justice to come. They had left breadcrumbs for Kane's men, a fake meeting with a phantom arms dealer, something Kane couldn't ignore, and just like they planned, Kane walked right into it. The black SUV rolled in first, headlights cutting through the dust, then another, then a third. 8 men stepped out, and then Kane himself, tall, calm, confident. Even now he thought he was in control. Carter stepped forward, emerging from the dark. Kane's expression barely flickered. "I assume you're the one responsible for this mess." Carter nodded. "Guilty." Kane smirked. "I should have known it was you." His eyes flicked to Izzy. "And the girl." Izzy's finger twitched on the trigger. Kane exhaled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Izzy stepped forward. "I know exactly what I've done." Kane sighed. "Then you know killing me won't change anything." Izzy's grip tightened. Carter stepped beside her. It's not about change. Kane's smirk faded. Then what's it about? Carter's voice was cold as steel. It's about finishing this. Kane's men moved first. The first bullet never landed. Silver's sniper round took out the shooter before he could even fire. Then Carter pulled the trigger, the shotgun blast erasing the next man in line. Izzy was already moving, a bullet slamming into another man's chest before he could raise his weapon. The fight was over in seconds. Kane's last guard tried to run. Izzy shot him in the leg. Then it was just Kane, alone, bleeding, cornered. Carter leveled his gun. Any last words? Kane let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. You have no idea what you've started, he whispered. Izzy raised her gun beside Carter. Carter looked at her. She looked at him. She was ready. She pulled the trigger. Kane's body collapsed onto the warehouse floor. Izzy exhaled. Carter put a hand on her shoulder. It's done, she nodded. Yeah, but deep down, they both knew. Wars like this never really end. They just wait for the next shot to be fired. And when that time came, they'd be ready. Together. The warehouse was silent except for the slow drip-drip of blood pooling beneath Douglas Kane's body. The gunfire had stopped. The fight was over. Izzy stared down at the man who had destroyed so many lives, his cold, dead eyes still holding that faint trace of arrogance. Even in death, he thought he had won. But he hadn't. She had. Carter watched her carefully, the shotgun still resting in his grip, his stance steady. He had been here before. Too many times. He knew what came after the killing. Mendez was the first to break the silence. Well, that was satisfying, Bishop sighed, rolling his shoulders. Can't say I'll miss the guy. Rains nudged Kane's body with his boot. What do you want to do with him? Izzy's voice was steady. Leave him. Carter raised an eyebrow. You sure? Izzy nodded. Let them find him. Kane had spent his whole life operating in the shadows, making problems disappear, controlling the game. Now he would be the problem. The man at the top of the food chain was dead, and the ones who had relied on him? They'd know exactly what that meant. It wasn't just a death, it was a message. They left the warehouse as the first light of dawn broke over the city, washing the blood-soaked floor in gold. Silver was already waiting in the getaway car, rifle slung across his lap. You guys sure know how to make an exit. Carter slid into the driver's seat. Where's the rendezvous? Airstrip. Planes fueled and ready. They weren't sticking around. There were too many bodies behind them, too many names on that list. Too many people who would come looking, and Carter had no interest in being found. The airstrip. The safe house in Arizona was gone. No more hiding, no more waiting. They had one goal left, disappear before the next wave hit. As they boarded the private plane, Izzy sat near the window, staring out at the open desert. Carter took the seat across from her, studying her quietly. She hadn't spoken since the warehouse, not because she was broken, because she was processing. Finally, she exhaled. I thought it would feel different, she admitted. Carter nodded. It never does. Izzy turned to him, her expression unreadable. How do you live with it? Carter was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You don't. Izzy swallowed hard, looking away. But she wasn't regretting it. She was accepting it. Mendez stretched in the seat behind them, kicking his boots up. All right, so what now? Do we ride off into the sunset? Maybe drink on a beach for a few months? Bishop snorted. We're not exactly built for retirement, man. Rains nodded. We've pissed off the right people. But there's always another fight. Carter exhaled. Not this time. That made everyone pause. Izzy frowned. What do you mean? Carter leaned forward. We burned them down. We took out the money, the power, the enforcers. There's nothing left to chase. Mendez raised an eyebrow. You really think it's over? Carter's jaw clenched. No, not really. But it had to be. For Izzy. For all of them. Izzy studied him. You're lying. Carter sighed, rubbing his face. I'm telling you it's time to walk away. Izzy's hands curled into fists. You get to walk away. But what about them? She gestured toward the window, toward the world beyond it. The ones who are still out there. Carter stared at her. She wasn't angry. She was determined. And that's when he realized this fight had never been his to finish. It was hers. Izzy exhaled. I'm not stopping. Carter sat back, watching her carefully. Then, where do you go from here? Izzy's voice was steady. I find the next name. A silence stretched between them. Then Carter did something he hadn't planned to do. He smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second burner phone. He slid it across the table to Izzy. She frowned. What's this? Carter met her gaze. A contact, someone who can help you. Izzy hesitated. Then she picked up the phone. She didn't need to ask who it was. She just nodded. Mendez exhaled. Well, shit. Looks like we're not done after all. Bishop grinned. Like you'd be happy drinking on a beach anyway, Rains chuckled. No rest for the wicked. Carter looked at his team, then at Izzy, and he realized, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone in this. He had built something, not a family. Not a gang, something else, something unstoppable. Izzy pocketed the burner phone. Carter turned toward the window, watching the sky shift as the plane ascended. The war was over, but the fight was just beginning. And this time, it wasn't his fight to lead, it was hers. Izzy smiled. She was ready.